Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Trend Report. I'm glad you're here today for this conversation that I know is going to be another great conversation that's going to help you in your business. So I'd like to welcome to the show today, Pat Morrison. Hey, Pat, how are you?
Doing great, Sid. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad that you're here. Pat and I have known each other for a really long time, had the opportunity to do some business together in the past. So, Pat, before we jump in, tell our listeners who you are and what you do.
Great. Pat Morrison. I'm the Vice President of Government Sales with Price Modern. Price Modern is a contract office furniture dealership in the Mid-Atlantic area. Been there for 8 years, but have been selling to the federal government for 40 plus years. And basically my role is to find, develop, and maintain existing agency accounts to actually bring in business. There you go.
All right, great. So Price Modern, for those of you that may not know them, they're a Hayworth dealer in the Baltimore, Washington area. And then Pat, how did you get into government sales? What took you there?
Well, born and raised in the DC area, in a suburb of DC, so grew up all my life around the federal government, graduated from Maryland in 1976. And there was a logical progression growing up in the DC area and being in the DC area, to get into sales. And if you're focused on a specific vertical, there is nothing better than the federal government, having that knowledge of growing up in the DC area.
And honestly, I mean, we're going to talk about the federal government and a little bit about why you need a federal program, but the DC metro market is the largest market for the federal government, regardless of what you sell.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It's Sid, I like to say it's the epicenter, of the federal government market. And it's very, very important to know the mechanics of selling to the federal government. And growing up in the DC area, where you basically read about the federal government every day.
Oh, sure.
It's a real asset. Yeah.
So how did you get into the furniture business? Explore your journey just a little bit. We all have a story, right, of how we actually got here.
Yeah. So started with a company called Tab Products in 1978. Which was more records management and color coding, but also a secondary product was furniture. I found the furniture product easier to sell to the federal government than the records management product. So started to migrate into selling furniture. And then from then on, Sid, basically, in 40 plus years, had a tour duty with Hayworth, a tour duty with Kimball. I've had a core duty with a couple of companies, but have been at Price Modern now for about 8.5 years.
So your story is a lot like mine and a lot like other people in our industry, that we just kind of fall into this business. There's no college career day just yet about the office furniture industry. And so most of us just kind of happen into it. So that's great. Yeah. So Pat, I know that, your focus is on the federal government and really driving revenue, and you've had great success in that arena over the years. If you're a dealer or a manufacturer, it doesn't really matter what you do. Why do you need a federal government strategy?
Great question, Sid. I think especially over the last 15 months or so with the pandemic, the business of government never stops. It'll slow down a little bit at times, but at the end of the day, it never stops. So there's 4 million federal government employees out there. 1.5 million of them are military. There's about 4,000 military bases. So in the U.S. So, if you're not already in the federal government market, if you're looking to try to get into the federal government market, there's a real impetus right now to get into the federal government, simply because they're still buying, a good selling location. And there's locations all across the U.S. Those 4 million people, they got to sit somewhere, Sid. So
yeah, they sure do.
To have them sit in your furniture than somebody else's.
Absolutely. So 4 million federal workers, 2.5 million of them, if I did the math right, are civilian workers, which means they're sitting in offices somewhere doing some type of work. So they're non-military, which is, I think, a really big number. People don't know that actually think about that. So I get that government is important, but there's this concept and belief that doing business with the government is hard. As somebody that has had great success selling to the government, how would you respond to that?
I would say the actuality is different. Number one, unlike other verticals, the federal government's everywhere. You know, number two, unlike some verticals, it may take a little longer to get paid, but at the end of the day, you'll get paid because it's taxpayer money. Number three, there's a transparency to the federal government because again, when the federal government spends money, they're spending taxpayer money, so they have a requirement to divulge some of these projects and things like that that in the commercial space you might not get.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think lastly, the GSA schedule program is a logical entry point. If you don't already have a GSA schedule, it's a logical entry point into the federal government market because you basically when you get a GSA schedule, you have like a hunting license or, it's a door opener, whatever you want to say, because there's a lot of business that's done through the schedules program, whether it's furniture, IT, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think the last number I saw, Sid, was last year the schedules program did somewhere in the range of about $35 billion. So it's a fairly large, contract.
Now that's not furniture, is it?
No.
Okay,
that's
35
everything.
billion general,
Everything.
whatever that.
Yeah.
So for clarification, GSA, what's that mean?
I'm sorry. Sid.
No, you're good. You're good.
Administration.
Say it again. Say it again.
General Services Administration.
Okay, great. So it's kind of like the governing body of contracts, right? And a schedule is a contract that you have negotiated, whether you're a manufacturer, a dealer, distributor, whatever you're making. You've negotiated a contract with GSA. And so that gives you a hunting license. And
Correct.
so one of the things that I've always found intriguing about working with the government is that because it's such a unique vertical market, you really know where your customer base is. I mean,
correct.
Now I'm going to date myself for those of you that are listening. Years ago, when there was a phone book, there was the blue pages in the phone book, which were your state and federal agencies, and you knew exactly where they were, exactly the numbers to call. The blue pages don't exist anymore, but it's not that hard to identify federal agencies in your marketplace. So it's almost like you've got an immediate business development list and you don't have to go hunt.
Correct. Yeah, I think in terms of finding business in the federal space, the two biggest impacts over the last decade or so, Sid, was 911. Prior to 911,
Mm-hmm.
you'd have a 9:00 appointment at the Pentagon. You wouldn't leave till 3:30. You'd go from ring to ring, level to level, cold calling, banging on doors. Now if you've got a 9:00 appointment, you're in the parking lot at 9:45. Security issues. I think the second thing is what we're going through now, the pandemic. Over the last 15 months, the federal government, like many commercial organizations, they've implemented work from home, telework, what have you.
Yeah.
So a lot of folks are not at their desk per se. They're working remotely, and that presents a bit of a challenge sometimes.
Sure. Well, you mentioned the three things or four things that you mentioned, which I think are really important to highlight again, were the government's everywhere. Anywhere you go, they're in every state and every major city, whether it's Social Security Administration or the VAs or some military base or home, name some agencies for me. Bail me out here, Pat.
Well, VA,
Yep.
The other critical thing, Sid, is typically from a budget standpoint, three agencies get looked on very fondly by Congress and the president. That's VA, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, VA, Veterans Affairs, and then the last one is, I just drew a blank. Sid, hold on.
I assume that you're going to say DOD.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. I was actually starting to write it down, waiting anticipation that that's what you were going to say, DOD.
Yeah, Department of Defense, for those of you with the acronym
Right,
challenge, Department of Defense. Yes.
All right, let's recap those real quick. The VA, which is the Veterans Administration, taking care
Veterans Affairs.
Oh, excuse me, Veterans Affairs. Thank you.
Yeah.
Taking care of our nation's veterans. Then DHS, which is the Department of Homeland Security,
Correct.
and then DOD, which is the Department of Defense, which incorporates all of the military bases and anything defense related,
including military hospitals.
Okay.
Some people are not unaware, Sid, that the Department of Defense has a fairly robust medical community. as well.
Sure. Like Walter Reed, right?
Correct.
That's a medical
Correct.
center, not a VA hospital. That's a great
Correct.
clarification. So the first, I want to recap these again. So the first one was the VA. The first one was that the government is everywhere. The second one is the guaranteed, because you're getting a PO from the government, you're going to get paid. It may take some time, but you're always going to get paid, which is not necessarily always the case on the commercial side or other sides where you have to fight sometimes to get paid. With the government, you're always going to be paid. There's complete transparency with the government because everything is basically a matter of public record. So they have to be transparent because they're spending the taxpayers' money. And a lot of taxpayers want to know how the money's being spent.
Correct.
And then the last benefit you said was the GSA schedule program actually opens the door for hunting, basically a hunting license using the new version, the electronic version of the blue pages of the internet, right? Of Google. So,
Sure.
um,
But before we move off that, one, Sid, real quick, again, having a GSA schedule, you also get opportunities pushed out, through the eBuy platform, Fed BizOps, a couple different portals that GSA manages and other agencies can have access to. Where as a GSA scheduled contractor, you'll open up your laptop one day and there's an email from eBuy saying a agency in Omaha is looking for 20 workstations.
Yeah.
You supply a bid.
So can anybody hold a GSA schedule?
GSA likes you to have been in business at least 2 years.
Okay.
I believe it is. And I think you have to show some financial stability in
Okay.
those years. But the bar's set pretty low. I think the last I saw, Sid, there's about 18,000, GSA scheduled contractors for the whole program, not just furniture. Furniture, the package office contract is a very popular contract, especially for furniture dealers. And I think there's about 175 or so contractors in the package office scheduled contract.
Okay. So if this is great information. So if I'm an office furniture manufacturer or a manufacturer of any type, and I don't have a federal contract for whatever reason, why do I want one?
Well, you can do small chunks of business, federal government, without a GSA schedule. There's this thing called the micro purchase threshold. Currently, it's at $20,000 because of the presidentially declared emergency with pandemic. But to get into larger, more complex projects, generally, you're going to have a GSA schedule if you want to sell directly to the agencies. There is some indirect activity, Sid, where maybe like in the past, DOJ, Department of Justice, would build a courthouse. They would come to the furniture community and say, hey, we're building this courthouse. We want you to bid on the furniture. In many instances now, what the federal government is doing, the DOJ would say, hey, construction company, we want you to build this courthouse, but now we also want you to supply the furniture. And in some instances, those types of projects will not require a GSA schedule.
Right.
For the most part, to be a real player, for the federal government with furniture, you probably should look closely at getting a GSA schedule.
Okay. And I mean, you really want it because it gives you an avenue for additional revenue.
Correct. The other benefit, Sid, among others, many, is that you can connect to other GSA schedule contractors, your schedule and their schedule, to provide a broader solution. So you might have a moving company, for example, who's relocating an agency. Well, the fact that you can connect your GSA schedule to their GSA schedule then gives that agency the opportunity to use the relocation company to move, but to buy new furniture from you through the relocation company contract.
Sure. It also, I think, creates partnership opportunities because if you're a seating only manufacturer and you're in a project that needs case goods, you could partner with a case good manufacturer. And if they didn't sell systems, you could partner with a systems manufacturer and you could come together with a complete solution, especially from one dealer that could help increase your opportunity to win the sale and those kinds of things. So I want to dive into a second for why the dealer, right? And what you mentioned is what I heard you say was the best avenue for a dealer is a packaged office contract. So can you explain what a packaged office contract is?
Yeah, sure, Sid. About up until about 15 years ago, if you were a dealer and you were selling into the federal government, and let's say you wanted to use Hayworth for the systems, and you wanted to use human scale for the accessories, and you wanted to use grade openings for the storage, a bundled solution. If that was the case, the agency would have to rate a purchase order for each one of those manufacturers against their GSA schedule.
Yep.
So this is one of the times where GSA really listened to their constituents. And about 15 years ago, they created the package office furniture schedule. So now a dealer like Price Modern can have as many furniture partners as you want based on what the agencies are buying. So as we currently have 29 different manufacturers on our package office schedule, a number of systems, a number of seating, a number of storage. That way we can bundle what the government likes to call a best value solution. It's administratively simple for the agency to buy this bundled solution through us, because in essence, they're getting 3, 4, 5 different manufacturers all on one purchase order.
Right. So it's it's really simple for the agency to buy, but it also makes it easier for the dealer in managing. You're managing through one contract, not through multiple contracts. And then it gives you the ability to bundle. And not to get too technical with this, but if I recall correctly, it also allows you to include open market items up to a certain percentage. And for clarification, an open market item is a product that is not on contract.
Yep. Specifically, thanks for bringing that up, Sid. Specifically, a couple of years ago, GSA allowed for what they call order level material, or OLM. And the key elements of OLM are the product doesn't have to be on schedule, but it just has to be Trade Agreements Act compliant, and it can't exceed 33.33% of the overall quote value.
Right. Okay. That's what I didn't know it was to that many decimals, but I thought it was 33%. So Pat, this all sounds really complicated. If you're a dealer or anybody in our industry that's not selling to the government, how do you learn to sell to the government and make your way through all these acronyms and all these agencies and all these terminology? I mean, how do you really learn to sell to the government?
Well, I think the answer to that, Sid, is you never really totally learn. It's like in some other verticals, you're always learning. And even I've been doing this for a long, long time. I'm still learning, in certain situations. I think the key though is what I would say, Sid, is if you can build trust and relationships commercially, then you should be able to build trust and relationships into the federal government. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the keys is being trustworthy and responsive and building that relationship. Because at the end of the day, the contracting officer at fill in the blank agency, they're a person too. They want to know they can rely on you. They want to know that, the product is going to arrive on time. When it's done, it's going to be what it's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Invoice comes, it's not 2, 3, 4, 5 different invoices. It's one invoice. It's the same amount on the purchase order. So I don't think it's as complicated as some folks think it is.
Sure.
The last comment, there are still people in government, Sid, they'll help you, mm-hmm. They'll help you be successful. Right. They know that, oh yeah, I'm familiar with your dealership. Yeah. I'm glad you guys got a GSA schedule. Why don't you come in? And the last comment, Sid, is every federal government agency, even by location, has what's called an Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Unit. So if you're a small business, you've got a GSA schedule, these folks are generally your first stop, because their
Sure.
role is to help you do business with that agency in that location.
Mm-hmm. So though it sounds complicated, what you're saying is it's not really complicated. It's kind of like anything else, any other vertical. You just got to learn it, and you got to learn the basics of it. But yet the government provides resources to teach you and to help you, especially if you're a small business, because the government is a huge advocate of small businesses. But additionally, a lot of manufacturers, or most manufacturers that have government contracts, also have government specialists on staff, whether they're salespeople, vice presidents, or internal support staff that all know and understand how to work with the federal government that actually can help you be successful with the government.
Yes. And to that end also, Sid, especially if you've got a socio-economic status like veteran-owned small business or women-owned small business or service-disabled veteran-owned small business, as an example, Veterans Affairs, they are directed by, edict that they need to do more business with service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses.
Right.
You have in addition to the capabilities, if you have one of those socioeconomic categories associated with your organization, that's another motivating factor, to do business with the federal government.
So let's talk about the set-asides for a minute because they are important. So if you're a woman, you're a minority, whether that be African-American or Asian-American or something like that, you're a minority. If you're an American Indian or an American Eskimo, I'm sure I'm missing some, but all of those qualify for you to have a set aside once you have a contract as a certain type of small business. So you are a service disabled veteran owned small business, or you are a woman owned small business, or you're a minority owned small business. And so the government tags certain projects throughout the course of the year as a set aside to that group. Which of those groups did I explain that right first?
You did. Yeah, you did.
I'm a government novice. I know enough to be really dangerous about this, but I also know enough that I could probably BS my way through any really good conversation because that's what salespeople do, right? But which one of those is the most popular, if you will?
Well, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the thing about the small business program, Sid, is that agencies are mandated by law to, I think it's 23 or 24% of their annual budget with small businesses. Specifically to your question, the one I see the most is probably 8A. I see a lot of opportunities that are designated. You must be an 8A to respond.
So Pat, explain what the criteria for 8A is, because that is a little more complicated than being a woman on small business.
Yeah, so this is a federal government program that helps newer businesses get on their feet. So you enroll in the 8A program, and then for, I believe it's 8 or 9 years, you have this 8A designation, which gets you into opportunities that you might not normally get into.
Yeah, it's a very powerful set aside. Yes. And the government gives you a mentor to actually help you grow your business, but it's also very specific about the requirements. So like I had a friend she's not in business anymore, but I had a friend she was Asian American, and that's what qualified her for the 8A status.
Correct. I think the other one that I see quite a bit, Sid, is ANC, or Alaska Native Corporation.
Sure.
This goes back to the mid 70s when Ted Stevens was a senator from Alaska, and they gave the Alaska Native corporations, preferential treatment in certain types of federal government contracts. So we see a lot of business revolving around ANCs. But again, the agencies look closely because, the last thing they want to do, Sid, is be called up onto the Hill to testify in front of a committee as to why their agency didn't meet their small business goals. So it's generally a good thing to have one of those socioeconomic designations.
So if you are a small business and you're listening to this, and there are criteria for being a small business, and one of the biggest drivers is employees, and if it's 500 or less, right?
Depends on the NAICS code. It's either employees or dollar, annual dollar revenue.
Okay. So there are some requirements to it, but if you are a small business and you have any sort of socioeconomic or veteran type status, it is extremely beneficial to you to jump into selling to the government, because 20+% of what the government buys as a whole is designated to go to this category, and they're focused on doing it. So if anybody listening, if you have any of those criteria, then you should explore working with a consultant to actually get you a federal contract, because you just can't raise your hand and say, oh, I'm going to have a federal contract and fill out a form, and all of a sudden you've got one. It's a little more complicated than that, right? So
it is. Okay. And here's the other thing with the schedules program. it's like caveat emptor when it comes to the consulting environment. Be careful because there are folks out there who'll say, you get a GSA schedule, it'll guarantee you business.
Yeah.
To you, and we'll get a schedule for you in 3 or 4 weeks. I don't think that that's a valid way to approach doing business through the schedules program.
That's a really, really great point, Pat. And, know who you're hiring and know what they're promising. And if it sounds too good to be true, it likely is too good to be true.
Yeah.
Right.
Again, we can't impress upon the listeners too much, Sid, that the GSA schedule is not a guarantee of business.
Yeah.
It's basically a door opener.
Sure.
License. What you do with it is up to you, but also bear in mind that GSA has a clause in all the solicitations that if you don't do at least $25,000 the first 2 years and $25,000 a year after that, they reserve the right to remove you from the program.
Yeah. And it's not really hard to do that either when you think about it. And when you think how big the government is, because you said it a few minutes ago, or kind of at the beginning of our chat, the government will always spend money.
Yes.
And it may slow down at certain times, like during lockdown and things like that, but they will always spend money because if they don't, I'm going to say this statement, tell me if I'm correct or incorrect, right? If they have a budget and they don't spend their allotted budget, they lose the money they didn't spend for next year's budget. Correct?
Correct. At one time, Sid, we called it dump money.
Yep.
Now they call it drop money. But in essence, most of again, going back to the budget, the discretionary part of the budget, which is, give or take, listen to us, give or take 2 trillion. But most of that discretionary spend is allocated on an annual basis. And remember, the government fiscal year is October 1 to September 30th. So we're halfway through the federal government fiscal year as we sit here in April. But you're right. There are some exceptions, Sid, depending on, who the agency is, what's involved. But for the most part, it's still the use it or lose it philosophy in the federal government with budget money.
You use it or lose it. I like that, right? That's you use it or lose it. And they want to use it because they don't want to lose it because it's really hard to get that money back, which is what makes August and September the 2 busiest months of the year for the government because they're working hard to spend that money.
It is, if you have any friends, and I don't mean you, Sid, but people listening who sell to the federal government now, if you try to get in touch with them in August or September, it's likely that they'll say, no, call me back in October.
Yeah.
It's frantic, people running around with their hair on fire, bids and quotes out, getting orders written up. It's also the same with manufacturers. If you're a dealer,
sure,
manufacturers trying to get the product out the door, because in many instances, it has to be shipped, installed, billed, and paid for. Not in every instance, but in many instances. So you have to have all that done by September 30th.
Okay. So, I've been talking a lot about the future of sales and what the future of sales looks like. I've had a whole podcast series about it. I've been talking a lot about it on Clubhouse with a variety of different things. And I know our industry is talking a bit about the future of sales. From your opinion, as somebody that's been involved with sales with the government, what do you feel is the future of sales with the government?
Well, the good thing about the federal government, as we've talked about, Sid, it never goes out of business. It slows down. As you mentioned, we have budget impasses and things like that. But specifically to a budget impasse, my experience has been, if it takes 3 or 4 months for the government to get a budget passed, well, all that does is that compresses the spend time to 8 to 9 months instead of 12 months. It makes it a little more compressed. Right. Selling to the federal government, I think, is it's hard to believe this, and I'm going to say this, Sid, and you can disagree with me, but I think it's a stable selling environment in that the need may be there, but the budget isn't. But once the budget is there and the need gets married to the budget, that results in an order. The budget, the federal government keeps growing, in many respects. There's also a part of the federal government we haven't talked about. That's selling to the federal government, other parts of the world. There's a contract that the State Department has, to sell furniture to embassies around the world. Mm-hmm. It has big hospitals and big air bases in other parts of the world. We've kind of concentrated on the domestic part, but there's other avenues there as well. And I think
Well, I want to add to that for a minute, because
yeah, go
a
ahead.
lot of times when we think about locations outside of the continental United States, right? We don't think about that they're actually buying US product to put there, because that piece of dirt, if you will, if I'm saying this correctly, that piece of land where they are is actually considered US soil.
Soil. Yes,
Yeah,
it is.
it's US soil is what it's
Yep.
considered. And so I remember in my days when I did do some federal work, like we were doing projects in Korea and Guam. We got called about projects in Iraq and Afghanistan because they're buying US manufactured product that is on contract. So
Correct.
they're not buying it from the local country or in country, as you might say. They're buying it from the US and shipping it over there. So there's a great opportunity. And those same agencies or bases that are outside the US have the same requirements for small business set asides and the same thing. So there's a strategy, there's a multiple pronged strategy with the government. First, you got to have a government strategy. Then you got to look around and see what's near you, right? If there's DOD near you, Department of Defense, and military bases near you, then you need that. If there's not, then you got to look at others, and then you got to look at what kind of set aside, if any, that you have. So just like any business strategy, you can build it out. You just got to put a little bit of work into discovering how you can do it best.
And I think the two comments I would add to that, you have to be patient. You know, the adage is fairly true. The wheels of government grind slowly. And I think you have to be persistent, Sid. You know, in many instances, you know, whether it's not returning your email or not returning your phone call, you know, persistence, I think, is a key to success in the federal government market. It's simply from past experience.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think, Pat, if you don't mind sharing, what do you think has made you and Price Modern so successful in selling to the government? If you had to boil it down to three or four things, what sets you guys apart and made you have such success in this vertical?
Gosh, Sid, I think I would go back to the two adjectives I used earlier. You know, building trust every day, you know, and valuing those relationships. You know, at the end of the day, there's a ton of people out there that can sell furniture to the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get that opportunity, you have to follow through. You know, you have to touch all the bases, whatever you want to call it. You know, if you say to that end user or contracting officer, it takes 6 weeks, you know, you can't say 6 weeks knowing full well it's going to be 8 weeks.
Yeah.
You know, if you do that, in many instances, Sid, you don't get a redo, you know, with the federal government.
Right.
You know, there are other folks out there that can do basically the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think building trust every day and making sure you value that relationship. I think the last thing that I would add is the federal government, in my experience, they like to know what the commercial space is doing. You know, so yeah. you see an article about what Google's doing with their work from home strategy. You know, you've got a couple key contacts in the federal government. It's okay to send that article to them and say, hey, by the way, remember when I would talk to you last week, you talked about your work from home strategy,
Mm-hmm.
Google's doing, or what IBM is doing, or here's what Northwestern Mutual is doing. They in many instances, they like to know what's going on outside the confines, you know, of their agency.
Because just because they're the government doesn't mean they're stodgy and old steel gray metal desk and gray panels.
Yeah.
I've been to some government spaces that are absolutely beautiful.
Yes.
And I mean, and they hire some of the world's greatest architects to design buildings for them. There's a building not too far from me. I don't remember. It's a Treasury building, I think. That was designed by Gensler. It's absolutely gorgeous. And so they can be high-end spaces. They're not all these, what we think of as these old stodgy gray metal desk. And so, and I just think there's so much opportunity. So if you don't have a strategy, I would encourage you to get a strategy and really think about how you could leverage this. So Pat, as we start to wrap up, I'm just, because of my experience in the government world, which is also, again, very limited, though I did lead a government team for a couple of years, only by default, because I was the only VP that would actually take the government team. So I kind of got baptized by fire, which is okay. And I made lots of mistakes along the way. You know, one of the agencies that stands out to me was one of the ones that I always enjoyed working with was the Corps of Engineers, specifically the Huntsville district. They do things a lot differently and they're very progressive with the spaces that they furnish. So, you know, what kind of tip would you give to somebody to understand how the Army Corps works and why would they want to try to work with the Army Corps?
Well, the Army Corps, especially Huntsville, you know, they do a lot of different things. They build dams, airports,
Yep.
hospitals, you know, and when they do, they will traditionally be involved in furnishing it. So there's a bit of a herd mentality sometimes, Sid, to the Corps in Huntsville. And what I try to remind people is there are other Corps locations. For an example, on the East Coast, the Corps out of Norfolk buys
Mm-hmm.
furniture. You know, the Corps out of Baltimore buys furniture. Now, don't misinterpret my statement. It's great to do business with Huntsville. You know, it's fantastic to do business with Huntsville. But as you're considering Huntsville, I think it's always a good idea to consider other Corps locations because they may end up buying furniture too.
So what I
And
think is super important about what you
yeah,
just said is just because Huntsville and their furniture team may be the widest known or the largest known group, they're not the only group. So you really have
correct.
to look holistically at this because the Mobile district is buying furniture, the Baltimore district's buying
Yeah,
furniture, the ones out
yeah,
west are buying furniture. So just because Huntsville may be the biggest doesn't mean the rest of them. And this is that concept around diversification. And you can't put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, your customer,
no,
again, go back to that blue page concept, look where look where the agencies are, and then go call on them because again, the Corps is an example. Those locations have interior designers,
correct.
and those designers are
Huntsville
involved.
has,
Go ahead.
last I heard, Sid, I think Huntsville has a dozen
Yep.
interior designers. You know, so they're a very sophisticated,
Yep.
you know, a buyer of contract office
Mhm.
furniture. Uh, but again, you know, there's I would say to your specific question, use the Corps as a component if there's one in your territory, area, whatever, but don't overlook, you know, you go into the office every day and you drive by an IRS, you know, facility, you know, or you drive by a State Department facility, whatever, a passport office, you know, I would do what you said. I would Google, internet, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
But also, if you have one of those socio-economic, you know, designations, the OSDBU is typically, excuse me, the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Unit is typically a good place to start.
Sure.
So they'll have industry days, you know, keep your eyes out for industry days where now they're virtual, but they'll introduce you to folks, professional affiliations. So there's an organization, Society of American Military Engineers. They have a lot of opportunities designated for military facilities, engineers, things like that. So again, to one of your earlier questions, this isn't a Rubik's Cube type vertical. You know, I mean, it's a fairly, you know, common way of selling. It's just got a little twist that it's
Mhm.
tax money, not shareholder money that's being spent.
So my takeaway from what you just said was diversification is key.
Yeah,
You have a government strategy, be diversified in that strategy. And remember that it's not just a military base, it's not just the Corps of Engineers, it's also civilian bases, it's also medical facilities. There's so many opportunities to do business with the government in almost every market in the country. You have this opportunity.
yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to employ a government strategy to grow your business, especially right now when we know that business is not what it was in 2019. We know that recovery is happening. It's slower than anybody wants, but this is a customer that's spending money
Correct.
consistently, which is why
Correct.
we're bringing this podcast to you because it is a way right now that you could take action to move forward before the end of the fiscal year and potentially grow your business and grow your profits by implementing a government strategy.
And to tie one last comment there, Sid, you know, it's okay to play small ball to begin with. You know, 2 task chairs, 2 file cabinets, you know, 4 workstations. And I think what you'll find over time as you build that trust, you build that relationship, it'll go from 2 task chairs to 50 task chairs. It'll go from 5 workstations to 100 workstations, because as you prove your value to those end users in that government agency, they're going to rely on you to be there when they need you.
Sure.
So I think that start off with a task chair here, a file cabinet there, and you'll find out that at the end of the day, over time, that'll grow. I would generally tell folks, Sid, that it's about a 12 to 18 month, experience getting yourself established, ramping up, getting that business. But if you stick with it, I think it'll pay dividends in the end.
And remember, they're always buying.
That's right.
Always buying. They're always
right.
spending.
And they pay.
That's right. To the point in the beginning, they're always buying. They're everywhere, and they're always going to pay the bills. Pat, I really, really appreciate you being here today and sharing your insights and information about this really important vertical. I hope that those of you listening today got some information and tips and maybe a little motivation to go out and start a vertical strategy in the federal government or the public sector if you don't have one already. Pat, if our listeners would like to get in touch with you, what is the best way that they can get in touch with you?
The easiest thing to do, Sid, is just email me, pat.morrison@pricemodern.com.
All right, we'll drop Pat's email address, in the show notes, so it's easy to get to.
And I'm on LinkedIn too. So
all right, we will also put his LinkedIn profile there. Hey guys, you know the rules. If you reach out to Pat on LinkedIn, you need to hit that connect button and you need to say add note. You need to send him a note, let him know that you heard him here on the Trend Report podcast. And that's why you're connecting, and thank him for his value that he added to you today. So Pat, again, I'm excited for you, what's going on with you. Congratulations on all your success. And I really appreciate you being here, sharing your insights to this important topic. I appreciate you.
Anytime, Sid.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.